Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. We are so pleased to have you here for our second half of our second workshop on Alt-AC. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to one of our fantastic doctoral students here at Arizona State University, and also the co-investigator for this grant and planner for this program, Marco Denert.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back from after the break. It is so great to have you all with us here, and it is my honor to introduce our great Dr. Melinda Rea-Holloway, who will be our second speaker for this afternoon. So Dr. Melinda Rea-Holloway earned an MA in sociology and a PhD in community psychology. She's an ethnographer who has spent the last 20 years pioneering ethnographic field and analysis methods for business consumption. She is the president and CEO of Ethnographic Research Incorporated, a professional research firm that does ethnographic research for clients. Her research has taken her around the world to hospitals, clinics, physicians' offices, retail spaces, restaurants, veterinary clinics, homes, and so much more. Ethnography in healthcare is one of her interests and specialities. Dr. Rea-Holloway has worked in a variety of areas as diverse as HIV/AIDS, car buying, notions of health and illness, divisions of labor and household chores, breakfast among college students, and teenage gamers, among many others. One might even ask, who hasn't she talked to? In her workshop titled Note from a Professional People Watcher, Turning Nosiness into a Career, Dr. Rea-Holloway will talk about her pathway from an assumed academic career toward working in the corporate realm and all of the adjustments in mindset and practice that were required. Please join me in a heart and warm welcome for Dr. Melinda Rea-Holloway.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm going to share a PowerPoint. I'll just get it started here, and you can let me know if you can see it.
Yes, we're seeing the whole PowerPoint. There we go. Yep.
Okay, there we go. Well, thank you for having me. And I do have this formal PowerPoint, but I'm a very informal person. So I hope that I'll be able to share some things with you. And I'm always interested in answering any questions that you have. And I will say all of the photos in my PowerPoint are from my field work. And so you'll get a little insight into what it looks like to be me and where I go and how I spend my time. Okay, so how do you become a corporate ethnographer? I'd like to tell you my story about how that happens. I assume you won't meet very many ethnographers in your life, and particularly those who make a living doing it. And so this will be fun to learn how this happens. I always like to tell everybody that I think I was born a sociologist because I was the kid who my mom was always saying, stop staring. And I was always staring. I was always interested in what people were doing and why they were doing it. And I was doing that my whole life. And now I tell people I'm the mom who my kids are saying, Mom, stop staring. That's embarrassing. Don't do that. So I've never stopped staring. But I was in high school and I took a sociology class and I thought, that's it. That's what I'm supposed to be. That's what I'm supposed to do with my life. And so I decided I was going to be a sociologist. And so I went to college and I got my undergraduate degree in sociology, and I thought, okay, that's not enough. I've got to get a master's degree in sociology. So I did that. And then at some point I realized, you know what, I kind of like the idea of community psychology because I wanted to do something applied. So I liked the kind of macro systems view of something, but I wanted to make a difference in the world. So I switched over and I got my PhD in community psychology. And somewhere along the way, I discovered ethnography. And I think it was in my undergraduate career. And I thought, this is so cool. That's what I want to do. I'd really love to be an ethnographer. But I thought pretty quickly after that, nobody is ever going to pay me to do that. I will never earn a living being an ethnographer, so I've got to have a backup plan. So in my mind, I thought, I'll go ahead and I'll get my PhD, I'll be a professor, and I'll do ethnography for fun, and I'll do that as part of my job. And so I was on that track, and I was planning on doing that, and I was doing an internship, and I was working, and this was 25 years ago. I was working helping AIDS service organizations understand what it was like to live with HIV. And that was very different 25 years ago. And so they hired me to hang out with people who were HIV positive and help them understand how we could do better, in terms of helping them to, live better lives and helping them with things outside of medications. How do we make life better for people who are HIV positive? And so I was in the PhD program, and I was going back to some of my classes, and I was talking about the work that I was doing and hanging out with people who are HIV positive. And there was another woman in one of my classes, and she was a vice president at Hallmark Cards. And she said, you should do this for corporations. You should do ethnography for corporations. And I said, okay, it didn't sound like fun to me. And I said, okay. And she said, well, come and talk to us. And so I took one of my professors with me, and we went and talked to Hallmark, and they said, you should definitely do this for us. And so we started doing some ethnographic work for Hallmark, and pretty soon other companies heard about what we were doing. And so they started calling us and wanting us to do ethnography for them. And it was a real struggle because we started a little center at the university, but there was always a disconnect between things like timelines and overhead between our corporate clients and the university. And so we started talking about, we should start our own company. And it took us about 5 years. And so we continued to do the work for the corporations through the university. But after about 5 years, we decided to go ahead and start our own company. And I'll be honest with you, when we started ethnographic research, I thought it would be a little part-time gig for a while until I finished my PhD. And then I thought, I would go on to something else. But within, a few months, we were holding on for dear life because it turns out that companies really needed ethnographic researchers. And so that was 20 years ago. And I've been doing ethnographic research for corporations ever since, and being busy, and doing a big business doing that. So I have this company, Ethnographic Research, and like I said, we just celebrated our 20th year anniversary. I have 3 employees. We've all been together for the whole 20 years, all 4 of us. And so we've done all kinds of really cool things. And if somebody had asked me 25 years ago, what do you think about working for corporations and doing ethnography for corporations? I would have thought that sounded pretty boring and not very fulfilling, but I'm here to tell you it's actually very interesting. And I'll tell you some stories a little bit later about what that's like. Okay, so why do corporations hire ethnographers? I think there are a lot of reasons that corporations need ethnographers, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of them and some of the work that I've done. The first is that I help companies understand the social and cultural influences and implications of their products and services. And this sounds like a no-brainer. It sounds like they should all be doing this all the time, but they don't always. And so some of the work that I've done kind of in this area is I have a client that was developing a new product that it was going through FDA approval, and they thought it was going to get approved. It didn't get approved, but they thought it was going to get approved. And it was a product that would help protect women from HIV. And so they wanted to understand how this product might fit into the lives of women who were at high risk of contracting HIV. And so they hired me to go out and understand what daily life was like for sex workers. And so my client, when she called me, she said, Melinda, we've been sitting around and we've been trying to figure out how we can answer this question. And we thought of you. And would you mind going out and helping us to understand a little bit better what it's like for sex workers and what their work day looks like and how this product might fit in and might help them. And it turns out it would have been really difficult to fit into their daily life and fit into the way that they worked, the way that the product worked. There would have been a disconnect between that. I also did a project on the culture of the bathroom space. And this was a very, very interesting project. And it was the only time in my whole career that I've had a potential client call me and say, hey, we would like to do an ethnography on the bathroom. And I thought, let me call you back. And so I went into my colleague and I said, do I want to be the toilet paper ethnographer? Do I want to be the toilet paper lady? And we started talking about it, and we decided the bathroom space is fascinating. And so wouldn't it be fun to do an ethnography of the bathroom? And so we did, and it was fun and it was funny and so interesting. And when I prepared my presentation and I previewed it with my client, he said to me, well, I really like all this, but I got to tell you, some of the language in the PowerPoint, I don't know if we should use this because we don't use this language, in our company. And the language he was talking about was, words like poo and poop and crap and, things like that. And I said, well, what language do you want me to use? And he said, well, we typically say defecate. And I said, oh, well, nobody I talk to use that word. So I really prefer to use their language. And he said, you know what, you're right, let's do it. And so I went to give the presentation, and I'm in this big, presentation room, and lots of people are there, and most of them work in toilet paper. And as I started presenting my PowerPoint, a lot of them were laughing and turning red and whispering to each other. And, as a sociologist, I was like, this is fascinating. It's fascinating that they don't use that word. So they need to use that word. They need to, live in the culture of the people who use their products. Also, we did a project with the Listerine brand, and we helped them understand how people brush and spit and gargle in 6 countries, and what notions of bad breath are, and how they vary cross-culturally. And it turns out they do quite a bit. So sometimes companies are hiring me to help them understand that, understand how things are experienced amongst people. Companies also hire me to help them understand people and their experiences. So I've done a year-long study with people who have schizophrenia and help how they navigate healthcare and what's that like. And I'm going to tell you, it's not what you think. These are actually, as a group, very educated, very proactive consumers of healthcare. And so sometimes I'm hired to help understand things like that. I'm also hired often to help companies understand mundane kinds of daily life things, like what it's like to load and unload your dishwasher. And I've studied that. And I've watched people on video diaries do that every day for a month. And every time they've loaded or unloaded their dishwasher, I've been there to observe that and to understand what are the patterns in that, and how do they experience doing that and using products. I'm also hired to help companies understand one another. And so sometimes I do B2B work. And so I've helped companies who design high-end electronics understand the salespeople who sell their products. I've also helped a pharmaceutical company understand the people who use their products. So we watched oncology injectables and the life cycle of those things, from the time they're delivered into hospitals or clinics to how they're mixed and how they're sent out on the floor, how they're administered, how it's thrown away, to help my client better understand the people who are actually administering those. So what does that mean in terms of what I do day to day? Well, I always tell people I have the coolest job in the whole world. Like, I literally would not trade with anybody. I think I have the funnest job because I get to be out there amongst people all the time. And I'm meeting new people and I'm learning from them, because everyone I meet is the expert in their life. And so I literally get to show up and say, you're the expert, teach me what I need to learn. So my day at the office, pre-pandemic and hopefully post-pandemic, will be that I get to just go out and hang out with people and do things. So sometimes I'm doing something like riding around in minivans and trying to help companies understand how to design those better. And so the way that I work is that I literally go and ride around with people and videotape them doing things and try to understand, how it happens and the cultural context of how it's happening. Sometimes I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons. I'd spend an entire summer studying 13 to 17-year-old gamers. And so I got to hang out in all kinds of strip malls watching them play Dungeons and Dragons, and in people's basements watching them play games. And so super fun. Sometimes I'm riding roller coasters. We did the first ever ethnography of Walt Disney World. And so we got to hang out with families when they went on vacation at Walt Disney World. And I have to tell you, I am afraid of roller coasters. And so it was not as much fun as it sounds like it is. But sometimes that's fun. Sometimes I'm shadowing doctors or veterinarians. And so I'm in the clinic and I'm like, said previous fall, I was in Germany and I was in this clinic and I was watching people use rapid testing machines. And so these are little tiny spaces and there's not very much room. And so I was literally standing in a mop bucket behind the door trying to observe what was happening and videotape what was happening. So again, sometimes it sounds more fun than it is. So I do that. I spend a lot of time out there doing field work. Then I do analysis. So I try to make sense of it all. So for every hour I spend out in the field, I spend about 4 to 6 hours trying to figure out what I learned. So looking for patterns, trying to figure out what the cultural norms are, connecting, my findings to business objectives. And then I spend a lot of time educating and reporting. So helping my clients to understand their customers better and helping them to see things with a fresh set of eyes, and then help make strategic or suggestions about strategic implications. So that's what I do, and that's how I got there. And I want to spend the rest of my time talking a little bit about what I think is important if you're going to work outside academia, and the kinds of things that are maybe different outside academia. And it took me a long time to figure all this out. And so I hope that I'll share some of this with you, and you guys can just go right there and not have to learn all this on your own. But I think one of the most important things is that working in business requires some adjustments in mindset and practice. And so I think you have to reframe your skill set, and you have to do a little bit of self-promotion. And so I think that's the first thing. And so as I'm kind of out here working in the business world, I noticed that there's a need for a lot of social science, people. But the people who hire you may not know that's what they're looking for. And so I think that it requires you to be able to sell your skill set and to be able to really articulate what you can bring to the table. And so what I found out is that it turns out that everybody needs a good ethnographer. And you'll remember that I started by saying I thought that nobody would ever pay me to be an ethnographer. I thought I would never get a job being an ethnographer. And as I kind of go out here in my everyday life, I realized that there's a need for a lot more ethnographers than there are actually in the corporate world. I'm surprised at how much my clients don't know about their customers. So sometimes I go in and meet a new client and they start telling me all the research that they've done. And then I go out and do an ethnography and I learn more than they learned in the last 3 years in the consumer research that they do. And so I'm always surprised about that. I'm always surprised about how much they don't know and the lenses with which they don't look at their customer. So there's a general lack of attention to social and cultural context in a lot of the clients that I work with. And in the early years, I really had to convince people why they should do ethnography. And I know that's changing a lot kind of in the corporate world, but when I first started doing this, I just spent a lot of time doing that, trying to convince people why they needed to hire ethnographers. And so one of the pieces of advice that I would give you is to have a really good elevator pitch for yourself. And so whatever skills you're bringing, make sure that you can really articulate them. And so you should spend some time thinking about that and practicing that. And you should have like the 20-minute version, you should have the 5-minute version and the 30-second version, because you never know who you're going to meet, on an elevator or in a hallway or whatever. And you should be able to really articulate what you bring to the table and to be able to sell yourself that way. Also, this is another thing that I think that requires a little bit of an adjustment in mindset and practice. I find that being authentic and being myself is actually really, really good. And it's helped me to do a lot out in the world. And I think I was sort of taught in academia not to be myself. I would think I was sort of taught to try to emulate somebody else. And so I know when I first was in the position of having to give presentations a lot, I didn't do that as well because I always was trying to give it as somebody else. I was trying to give a presentation like somebody else who I admired and who was really good at that. And at some point I realized that I give the best presentations when I'm more authentic. And so I think that's an asset to whoever you are, be that. And also it's an asset for me in doing ethnography. And I show up, I meet strangers all the time and I have to get into their lives really quickly. And so I usually have about 5 minutes to gain rapport and to really convince somebody to let me into their lives. And you really just cannot do that unless you're authentically yourself. And so I would encourage you to be yourself. Another thing is one of the things that I really had to unlearn was the way that I communicate. And it's a little bit different than what I was taught in the way that I was supposed to communicate. And so the way that you go about kind of convincing or impressing people is different in the boardroom than it is in the classroom. And so I found that, it's better if I don't use big words, or words that maybe everybody doesn't understand. I may know what they mean, but a lot of other people don't know what they mean. And so I've always found that it's much better to just be very clear in the way that you communicate. And so that's one side of it. The other side of it is that in the business world, I have to do a little bit more showmanship, than I would in academia. And so there's a little bit more of that. Another difference is how you think about objectives and goals. And this can be really hard for social scientists. And we touched on this earlier. So I work with, 3 colleagues who are all sociologists. And whenever we have to write implications for our clients, we usually have a long list of implications that are really social good, sorts of implications. And sometimes my clients are interested in those and sometimes they're not. But we always have more of those than we have the business, ones to start out with because we're social scientists. And so you have to kind of think about it a little bit different. Also, expectations are different in the business world. When I first started doing this, I found that I really don't have to be as rigorous as what I was taught in academia. So in academia, I may want to take 2 years to do an ethnographic study, but I don't have that timeline for my corporate clients. And so I used to get really stressed out and thinking, well, this can't possibly be done, in 4 months or 5 months. And what I realized was it can be done. It's not as good if you spent 2 years doing it, but my clients don't really care because it's still way better than anything that they have. And so they had nothing and I'm giving them 60%, as good. And that's good enough. And so adjusting my mindset around that was really important. Another thing I learned was that I can get into almost any setting. And I remember, and this was a long time ago when I was getting my PhD, but they used to tell me that, you have to go through all the gatekeepers and it's really hard to gain entrance, to hang out with people. And so I thought that, and what I've learned in the last 20 years is that almost anyone will literally let me come home with them. Almost anyone. I have like an 85% success rate of walking up to people in public places and saying, this is really strange, but can I come home and learn from you? I'm a sociologist. I know this sounds totally crazy, but I'm studying this, and the best way that I can learn is to come and watch you do it. And then, just rapid ethnography. What I would think of as rapid ethnography in academia, it takes too long for my business clients. And so I have to do things really quickly now. Another thing I want to kind of communicate to you is that you probably have skill sets that you don't realize that you have. And so you should be more confident than you are. And I think I was probably 10 years into my business before I was truly confident that I was an expert. And I was an expert long before that. But I remember the moment where I realized that I was an expert and I became confident. But you should be confident, and I'm going to tell you why. You should be confident because you have a lot of skill sets that you don't really know that you have. And you get out there in the world and you realize that you may have to think about them differently or reframe them. And so one way that I do this is that it was really hard for me when I started this company because I had never sold anything. I'd never sold a taco before I started this company. And then I had to be the salesperson for our company. And so I was really uncomfortable in that role. And I thought, I don't know how to be a salesperson. And then I realized that I could be an educator instead. And so when I go out and try to convince a company to hire us, I'm really just educating them on ethnography. And I am an expert on that, and I can do that well. And so when I reframed it in my head that I can be an educator and not a salesperson, it was a lot more comfortable for me. And I think I got better at it when I thought about that way. Another thing that I think that you probably are really good at that is a really big asset is the ability to approach a problem or a topic with an inductive lens. And I think this is a game changer in corporate America and in our culture generally. I think most of us think about the world deductively, and we want to know what's going on and we figure out a hypothesis and then we, try to figure out whether we're right or not. The work that I do is the opposite of that. And so I start every project assuming I don't know the answer. And I collect data and then I develop a theory. And it's shocking to me how infrequently that happens, out in the corporate world. And to have that skill to be able to do that is a big asset. To just know how to do that is a big asset. I just did a training with a manufacturing company in Sedalia, Missouri, a few months ago. And I was telling them about how to be inductive and how to go out and approach questions inductively. And they stopped me about, 10 minutes into my explanation of what induction was. And they said, we've been doing this all wrong. We've been doing this all wrong all these years. We think we have to have a hypothesis and we think we have to start there. And you're right. Oh my gosh, we could have learned so much more if we had just looked at this problem inductively. Another example is seeing a group of consumers, a process, or the user of a product with a fresh set of eyes. And so I meet people who have been working in the same, industry for decades. And sometimes I say to them, okay, I'm going to ask you to listen to my presentation as if you've never heard about this product before, or you've never learned anything about this consumer set. And you notice different things if you look at it from that lens. And so one time I was giving a presentation with a group of people and I was showing them some video and they had me stop the video and they said, why did you talk to that person? They're not even our customer. And in the video, this customer was putting a 50-pound bag of their product into their cart. But they hadn't seen that because they had just seen this customer that didn't fit the profile of who their target customer was. And so sometimes you lose the ability to see that, when you get so deep into the woods. And so just having the skill set that allows you to stand back and see things that other people might be missing is really important. I also sometimes take clients in the field with me and we'll go out after field work and they'll say to me, that has to be the dirtiest house you've ever been in. And I have to say to them, not even close. Like, this is well within the normal range of how Americans live. And they can't believe it because that's not what they think it looks like, right? And so just having the ability to see that and to know that that's real life and to know that that's normal and to be able to communicate that is important. And then the last example I'll give you here is what dinner looks like. So I was working for a company that makes kitchen appliances. And I was in the field and I was watching this mom cook dinner in Texas. And she had several things on the stove going simultaneously. And right in the middle of all of it, her toddler runs in and hits their head on the side of the dining room table. And so blood starts squirting everywhere. So it's total chaos and pandemonium. And the toddler is crying and the mom is trying to keep things from burning and trying to do triage on the toddler. And so I go in and I show this video clip to my client. And they said to me, one of the engineers that was a designer said to me, in all the years that I've been designing stoves, I never imagined that's what dinner looked like. And I said, what did you think dinner looked like? And he said, I don't know, classical music and wine, I don't know. But you can imagine you design a very different product for classical music and wine than you do for blood and, and crying. So, so that skill set, also very important. Also the skill set of just kind of being able to organize and sort and put things in coherent, kind of create a coherent understanding, to a bunch of data. That is a really good skill set. And so if you are already doing that, you should promote yourself for that. If you know how to not overweight an outlier. So sometimes I take clients in the fields with me and we'll see something and it's really sensational and they'll go back and tell everybody that's what's happening. And I have to say, wait a second, that was an outlier. Just the ability to know that and the ability to know not to overweight that. On the other hand, also having the ability to know that sometimes the outlier is fascinating and has all these implications for, product development and innovation and, all of that. That's an important skill set. Being able to uncover multidimensional understanding, also is a very important skill set. And then being able to communicate, and you guys should all be good at this, in a way that brings lived experience to life. Just being able to give a voice to things that often go unspoken, or giving a voice to people that don't get a chance to speak often, or pointing out why in addition to how, and being able to articulate that in a way that can help people to learn and can result in action. Those are all really important skill sets that you probably already have. Okay, so that's my formal presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Melinda. Oh my gosh. I have kept my eye on chat so that you have been able to focus on that fantastic presentation, but just all of the love and interest and people saying things like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know this was a thing that you could do, and lots of questions. I've made a list for myself of some of the questions, and you're welcome, folks, to keep placing your questions in the Q&A. And also, a lot of you are answering each other's questions, or at least giving resources, and that's fantastic as well. So I think where we're going to start off with, so especially given the fact that so many people, we have psychologists on here saying, is it too late for me to learn ethnography? I want to do this. And, like, people want to learn how to get into this. And so, and Nancy actually wrote a question saying, how do you go about finding and selling your services? You did get into that in the second part. I love this framing yourself as an educator about ethnography. I mean, when you said that you got to teach people about induction, that just tickled the qualitative geek in me so much. I was like, I want to go, I get to teach it to graduate students and undergraduates, which is great as well. But how do you get started with this? How do you find the clients? How is it if other folks wanted to do this professionally? What are some steps of making it happen?
Yeah, so at this point in my career, I've been doing this for 20 years. The majority of my work sort of comes to me. And so I have relationships, with clients, and then they move to new companies. And so I'd say 80% of my work is just, word of mouth or repeat business at this point. In the early years, I did a lot of conferences. And so I presented, on what ethnography was, and just doing that, just teaching people about ethnography got us a lot of business in the early years.
What kind of conferences, Melinda? What type of conferences? Like, because we go to National Communication Association, but that's not professionals who are going to be hiring researchers.
Yeah, market research conferences.
Okay.
Mostly business conferences, just, whatever where potential clients were. And that's what we did in the early years. So I think that's where we got most of our business early on, and just word of mouth, people, finding out about us and having a website, 20 years. I read a book when I first started this company, and it was about marketing and sales, because I know how to do it. And it gave some really good advice that said, if you're trying to sell something, you should place yourself in an obvious position where people who are looking for your services are going to find you, rather than try to drag people who don't know that they need to hire you to you. You should just make yourself visible. And I think it was really good advice. And so we had a website that, was engaging, and we paid to, make ourselves show up on the Google searches. And so that's really the only marketing we've ever done.
Got it. And another question we have here is, how important is it to have a great team for doing the work that you do? And that's from Marco.
Yeah, it's so important. And that's why I hang on to them for dear life. And we've been together for the whole 20 years, because it is really hard to do this work fast. If you're trained as an academic ethnographer. And so you kind of, after you learn how to do it, it gets easier. And so we're a very well-oiled team at this point. There's 4 of us, and we kind of, we each do different things within the company. And so we depend on each other a lot.
Got it. This kind of connects in terms of how you work together as a team. Is how do you do your analysis? Do you use a specific software? Do you mix it with any other types of methods, or is it ethnographic only?
Yeah, we only do ethnography. And so we kind of planted our flag there really early on and decided that's what we enjoy doing. So we wanted to stay doing that. And I think it also makes us the experts in ethnography. And so we're not doing focus groups on Monday and ethnography on Tuesday. And so we're really just focused on ethnography. I do analysis the old school way, although when I first started doing ethnography, I would literally write out my notes and cut them into chunks and then stack them on the ground and make piles on the ground and look for patterns that way. I do that. Yeah, I do that on the computer now, but I don't use any programs that are for that. I do just, I use a word processor most of the time, and my colleague Kazio uses an Excel spreadsheet.
Okay. Yeah, great. So this was a question that came up with Nancy's presentation as well, but do you have to go through any type of IRB, or what are the sort of ethical things? A question just came up from Marianne. How do you present findings and also protect the privacy of those you observe? What are those considerations, and how do they differ then from the ones that we have in the academic world?
Yeah, so I do a lot of work in healthcare, and so if I'm doing field work in like a hospital that's associated with the university, which are a lot of hospitals, or with a big a medical institution, I often do have to go through IRBs in order to get into the hospitals, and so we do that, but not only if we have to, because it's very time consuming and it slows down our timeline a lot, and my clients usually don't want that. So we do deal with IRBs, but not unless we have to. And in terms of protecting confidentiality, so there's a couple of things. The first thing is that I don't do anything covert. And so I always get informed consent, and that's written informed consent from people, and I explain exactly what we're doing and make sure that they understand that. And we have a mutual agreement about how we protect their confidentiality. And so when I show clients videos and stuff, I've gotten permission to do that. Once in a while, I do have people I'll see something that maybe is illegal, or maybe something that would get somebody fired, and I usually just opt not to share that, with my clients. I just keep that, confidential if there's potential harm to someone in that way.
Got it. Thank you. And Nancy also, for those of you who are interested in that question, responded in the chat there, so that may be of interest to you. Another set of questions or area is this question of what is the timeline of working with a client? Is the final outcome the report that you give to the group? And also a curiosity, do you ever have to do a return on investment report for your clients where it's like you need to show them the value added from the research that you've done?
Yeah, timelines vary a lot. And so I would say a typical project for us is probably 4 to 5 months from start to finish. But sometimes I get to do something longitudinal. So once in a great while, I get to follow people for a year, or one time I got to follow people for 3 years. That's very unusual in the work that I do now. And sometimes it's even faster than, 4 or 5 months. And so I think I get a lot more time than most people working in market research because ethnography is just more labor intensive, but it's still pretty quick. My final reports are usually, it varies a lot. So it's usually a stand-up report with video that kind of, brings it to life. So video from fieldwork that brings it to life. Okay. We do ideation sessions sometimes. I've never been asked to do a return on investment, but I often have clients that, tell me, how valuable it is, to them, and tell me in what ways they find it valuable. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And most of your stories seem to be from corporate clients. And as someone was interested whether you do, Bridget was interested in whether this kind of work could also be done for nonprofits or governmental groups, or whether they ever come to you.
Yeah, we do very little work in the not-for-profit or governmental space, and that's just because our pricing structure is one way, and it's really a mess. And we also have to carry different levels of insurance for different things that we do and different kinds of insurance. And so we just kind of made a decision to stay in that space. Once in a great while, we did a project for a public-private venture in Atlanta, and they wanted to bring more tourism there. And so they hired us to do that, but almost all of our work is for corporate clients.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Let's see here. Here's a good question from Sierra, and Sierra asks, if companies don't think they need ethnographers, how do you get your foot into the door to even have a conversation with companies to make them realize that you're a valuable asset? Basically, how do I get started in this kind of work? Is there anything else that you have to say on that?
Yeah, I think, just educating people on what ethnography is and what it looks like and what the projects that we've done look like. That's usually how I convince people that they need to do ethnography.
Great. Is there any type of work that you would say, no, thank you, I'm not doing that work? I'm not going to take on this client.
Yeah, we have, just for kind of personal moral reasons, sometimes we've turned clients down. But in terms of like what I find interesting, it's shocking. Everything I've ever done in 20 years has been fascinating. And I'm telling you the truth on that. Even when I think it's not going to be, I just always feel so thankful that I am allowed into people's homes. I go and hang out with people who have very serious medical conditions, and they trust me, to tell their story and to be their voice. And I love that. And then sometimes I'm doing this really super fun stuff like, hanging out at Walt Disney World or learning from teenage gamers. And so everything that I do, I think is fascinating, even when it doesn't seem like it will be in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So we have a couple bold questions where people want to know, how much are people willing to pay for this? And what could you tell us about pricing structure? And I realize that you may only be able to tell us aspects of that, but folks are curious.
Yeah. So they pay a lot for it. It sounds like a lot anyway, but ethnography takes a lot of time. And so, for every hour I spend in the field, I spend, 4 to 6 hours trying to figure out what it is that I learn. And so it's very labor intensive. And so it takes a lot of time, but I'd say our average project is somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000. And, we do projects that are smaller than that. We do projects that are bigger than that, but that's I think pretty average. I will add the note that it was really hard for us to figure out how much to charge in the beginning because we had never sold anything and we didn't know how much it was worth. And so that is something that's really hard to figure out initially. And so, we just kind of started with what it was going to cost, what was the hard cost to do this, and then added some profit onto there. And then eventually we started kind of hearing what other people were charging and kind of took that into the mix. And that's kind of where we landed, somewhere in the middle there.
Mm-hmm. Another one of our questions is, and thank you, by the way, of sharing that. I think people are really pleased to better understand that. Another question has been, and this is an issue for all ethnographers, whether in an academic space or not, is navigating our own subjectivity and identity in the field. And, that there's, sometimes safety considerations or the kind of information that people are willing to perform in front of us because of the way that we show up. It sounds like if you started this when you were in graduate school, you were quite a young woman. And I'm interested, and this person who asked a question, how does navigating your gender or any other of your subjective identity facets play a role in your work?
Yeah, well, you were very sweet to say that, that I was young. So I think that there's a couple of things. I found that if I am my authentic self, I can literally be with anybody, and you have to find your appropriate field role. And so when I was hanging out with the teenage gamers, it would not have worked for me to show up and say, hey, I'm a gamer too. Just let me hang out with you and do this thing. So I had to take a different role in that situation. But when I go into a house with, somebody who's got 3 kids and things are totally chaotic, I can say, I'm the mom of 3 too. I totally get this, relax. I know what this looks like. So I think that's an important thing. You have to know your role, and you have to have an appropriate field role. And I've hung out with furnace installers, I've done, I've hung out with surgeons, I've hung out with sex workers, there's been nobody that I could not feel comfortable with or have them feel comfortable with me in my entire career. I've never found a situation where that was not the case. And so I think that's the first thing. Safety, my first ethnography was when I was in undergraduate school, and I spent 2 years riding with police officers. And so I don't run into things now that I feel are I mean, once in a great while, I do run into a safety issue, but hardly ever does that happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Melinda, to what do you attribute your ability to be in the space and in the context and allow people to be so comfortable around you? Do you attribute it to training? Do you attribute it to your own sort of personality of self-awareness? If others here would like to be able to cultivate that ability themselves, what sort of recommendations would you give?
Yeah, I think you have to sort of put your opinions and your judgment on a shelf. And I will say, in the spirit of full transparency, I have always never had a problem with this, and this has been really easy for me until the 2016 election leading up to that. And I sort of had some trouble. You know, I ran into a patch where I had trouble not judging people. And so I had to work through that and find my way to the other side of that. But I think that's the very first thing, is that you really have to put yourself in a space where whatever your opinion is or whatever your experience is, you have to put it on the shelf when you're there to learn from people. And when I'm doing field work, I see that as my job. I'm there to learn as much as I possibly can, and I'm there to be inductive, and I'm there to, I tell everyone I meet, you're the expert and I'm here to learn from you, and you have to really mean that. And I think if you can really mean that, then you can make almost anybody, you know, comfortable, and you can be really good at this job. Yeah.
Fantastic. Speaking of the pandemic, and I do remember our conversation last fall about how your work needed to change during the time of social distancing. And you did speak about the fact that you do lots of ride-alongs and being in people's homes, but also video diaries. Do you think that there's, what kind of lasting effects on your own work has this year been of forced social distance?
Yeah, well, we were doing video diaries prior to the pandemic. And so it was really great because that was always half of what we did. So we always had people keep video diaries for us, and then we always went in the field. And so during the pandemic, we just relied lots more heavily on those video diaries and doing online interviews. I think that we'll be back in the field, just based on what my clients are saying to me and based on what, you know, potential participants are saying. I think we'll be back in the field probably in the fall, hopefully. And I don't think that there's a replacement for that for me personally. I mean, the online interviews are great, the video diaries are great, but I really need to be back in the field to really be able to do my job properly. But in the meantime, the video diaries have been awesome.
Well, if you need any interns, I suspect that you may have cultivated some interested folks on this.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rea-Holloway, Melinda, for your time, your expertise, the willingness to come into a discipline that is not your home discipline. We appreciate you. Folks, if you would take a moment and share the most important thing you're going to take away from our second workshop, or at least something you're going to take away from the second workshop, that would be fantastic. And thank you so much both to Melinda and to Nancy. And at this point, y'all, our official public workshop is complete. Melinda and Nancy, students in my COM 692, please stay online, and we will reconvene our smaller group in about 7 minutes, so about 20 minutes to the hour. Thank you all for coming. And oh, by the way, before you sign off, Marco, you were going to do a wrap up. I apologize. I almost jumped us off that.
You're fine, no worries, Sarah. Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for being here, for your active participation in the chat and all the interaction that we saw here. Thank you again to our amazing speakers today, Dr. Nancy Bain and Dr. Melinda Rea-Holloway. I learned so much just from listening to your stories and the advice that you gave. So this was really, truly inspiring and amazing. From the chat, I can see that there seems to be a lot of desire and craving for this type of advice and for these types of workshops. And I'm happy to report that we will have one final installment of this workshop series next Tuesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time. Rahul Mitra, Dr. Rahul Mitra, who's been very active in the chat box here, will be one of our speakers alongside Dr. Nicole Martin, and we will be talking about academics and administrators and what that means to be in those types of positions. The link that I dropped there is for you all to find out more about that and how to register for the specific workshop. We'll convene on Zoom here again. And I wish everyone from wherever you are joining us today a very wonderful weekend, and I hope to see you all on Tuesday. Goodbye, everyone.